Little Archie, issue 179, The Art of Levity. Zelda tells Sabrina to think and use her magic powers. She levitates, but then arbitrarily falls. This is the biggest wimpification I've ever seen. She didn't tell her magic to make her fall, so it wouldn't do that. She's told to hurry to school, and she sees Weatherby in the hall wasting his time being petty again. She thinks that the rules are no running in the halls. I guess because if a student ran into another one, he'd get hurt, and maybe a fight would be started. But I wish that was explained in the story itself, because when there's no one around in the hall, I see no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to run in the center of it. It seems unfair that she's not allowed to run the halls even when she's late, when that's a basic human instinct when you're late. And I remember an Archie's Girls Betty and Veronica story where Weatherby saw a character running the halls and he didn't do anything about it, and didn't even complain about it. She only walked into Weatherby because she was distracted looking at Weatherby because he was glaring at her instead of doing his actual job in the principal's office. Reggie complains that she has no excuse for bumping into people when she has magical powers. I like that she just acts like he didn't say that she has powers at all. She's improving, but he's right. She could have warped to class. She had no excuse for not flying to school on a broom again and then simply warping her broom home. She also could have frozen time to effortlessly avoid being late for school. Wasn't that standard procedure? But if Reggie told her this, it'd mean that nobody wouldn't notice this plot hole. But at least he'd be giving her valuable advice so she'd never be late again. So the last bell rings, and Grundy calls them the tardy boys, overreacting because they arrived to class not even a single second late. At least she doesn't say she plans on punishing them. She tells Reggie to get that book in the hall, and he picks up Sabrina's book, which conveniently is her book on levitation that conveniently has magic words in it that seem to work for a mortal for no reason. Why would there be an entire book dedicated to just one spell of levitation? I just have to assume that it has emergency magic on it for witches to practice magic with in case they ran out of magic, and wasn't designed with witches who live among mortals in mind. But that shouldn't be the case for any magic items on Earth regardless. The answer would have gotten rid of that for them. I guess it really does have residual magic on it from being constantly used by witches, and nobody in that family of 3 thought to regularly cleanse it of magic in case something like this would happen. And most importantly, the first thing I thought is that Sabrina has no excuse for bringing this book to school in the first place. He bumps into the ceiling. It sure is lucky for Reggie that he's such an immediate natural with magic that he immediately is better at maintaining levitation than Sabrina. There are people who are naturals at stuff in real life. This isn't necessarily forced, it just means that if he was born a warlock, he'd be way better at it than her by now. Sabrina finds out right away that she lost her levitation book, and casts a spell to bring it back to her. Oh, but it doesn't simply warp directly to her, like the broom did. It sprouts wings and flies over to her without Reggie, making him fall on his face like Archie wanted. Well, she still got it back. So it's not too bad because it just gave a slapstick for Reggie. Out of complete nowhere, Grundy decides to tell Reggie to spend the next week with her after school. Sure, he did something wrong by being nosy and reading Sabrina's book, but who wouldn't want to try levitation for a bit? She didn't know that's what he was doing. Since when is it punishable to fall just outside of the class door? Wouldn't Grundy think this was just freaky? What, did she conveniently come to the correct assumption about why he fell and punish him specifically for what he did wrong? It's off-putting that she doesn't explain that. It'd be realistic of her to know Sabrina's a witch by now. So what if he wanted to float for a bit? The only problem with that is that it'd make it obvious that magic exists if anyone happened to walk near him and saw it. So Sabrina wouldn't want that. What I wish happened is that he should have asked to see the book and get told to do some charity work in exchange for the magic words, with the agreement that he'd levitate in private. And I guess she makes him forget the magic words after this, because otherwise he'd levitate all the time after this. But of course, she has no reason to trust Reggie the show-off to just levitate without anyone but a witch seeing. So she'd say no, and then he'd be more justified in looking in the book. If she explained that she doesn't want him to show off levitation in the story itself, then I'd immediately understand why it's so wrong for him to use the book to levitate for a bit. This story was about Sabrina being late to school when she had no excuse not to try to fly to school to get there faster. And she doesn't even teleport to class like the other times. So she bumps into Reggie and loses her book to him, and for no reason she brought her levitation book to school with her. So he reads out the magic words, which you'd think everyone in class would hear, and for no apparent reason he's able to float despite being mortal. But he barely gets the time to enjoy it because she casts a spell to get the book back. What I hate the most is its mean-spirited ending. It's not like Reggie tried to tell people Sabrina's a witch. Whether it's Reggie or not, Grande seems to have no excuse to punish Reggie because she doesn't explain why she's doing it. Little Archie issue 180, One of the Family. Sabrina says Christmas is the time where everyone's happy with their families, being naive enough to think that applies to literally everyone. Salem suddenly cries and she uses magic to let him speak, which is out of character because she didn't do it for such a long time after the first time. And he says he's sad because he can't be with his family. He wouldn't care because cats view the family that raised them as their family. And he wouldn't remember his family because cats are always separated from their family when they're extremely young, apparently has human intelligence. So he cares that he isn't with his siblings. It's unique for Salem to have any siblings. He says that he sort of grew up in a nursery rhyme. Huh? Is this ridiculous backstory of it supposed to be the final issue of the comic? Really? So he started out living in a parallel universe where cat people in clothes kicked him out of their house for losing his mittens and didn't want him to return until he found them. It's shocking how awful his father is. He says he wandered from story to story, which would only be possible if he kept finding convenient portals to other universes made by wizards, or warped to other universes himself. The real problem is that he says story to story when he would actually say universe to universe. I really hate this. He wonders if a pair of mittens fell in the universe of King Arthur, labeled as such by the wizard who must have made the portal machine. I wish we saw it. There's so many stories where he has magic. Why didn't he summon mittens? He wandered into a room where Merlin was running away from a vial with smoke coming out of it in a panic, instead of just pointing at the vial to get rid of it. We see Salem get sent flying to Sabrina's head. From what? There's a boom sound effect, but I can't see what he flew out of. I guess he flew out of a book from a bookshelf because it was conveniently a portal to another universe. Why does he have to have such a confusing, convoluted backstory? Everyone assumed he just had a normal cat's backstory. And in the stories where he's actually a magic cat, I'd still assume he had a normal cat's backstory, with the only difference being that he's from the Witch World's pet stores. He says he'd like a few days off to visit his folks. We didn't need to see any of that nonsense where it pretends that universes can exist in books. If his parents were as abusive as his father was in this panel, then he just looks stupid for wanting to see him again. Out of desperation, he wonders if Merlin could help him get back to his old house because Sabrina can't find it, despite being an all-powerful witch. But then after too many panels, he says to Merlin that he needs mittens. Then he'd just ask Sabrina to zap some up for him. Why would this so-called wizard to just buy a pair instead? Salem just says cats don't have money, even though Sabrina has some. Somehow I'm expected to believe that Merlin's only good at big tricks, not small ones. So creating a wrapped gift of mittens somehow leaves him exhausted. Really? Because he said he used up all of his magic, and talks as if big tricks leave him exhausted too. The first act of magic he ever did, he talked as if it would leave him exhausted. Sabrina thanks him for the easy act of magic. I thought Sabrina didn't know where his house was. Why does she effortlessly fly over to it with Salem? I guess he told her which book was the portal to his universe. I guess he told her what house it was. That shouldn't be kept off screen. I thought the whole reason they had to go to Merlin was so they'd get shown what Salem's house looks like, so she could warp there. She says she's gonna miss him this Christmas. I was suspicious when Merlin zapped up mittens just fine right after saying he's bad at small tricks. And apparently I was right because he only zapped up gloves. And so Salem gets kicked out anyways. Merlin would imagine mittens. There's no excuse for this mistake of his. Luckily, it turns out Sabrina is still here, so she's able to take Salem home, and the story ends with him saying he loves this crazy family as Zelda bought mints for everyone, wasting money instead of summoning them. Sabrina didn't have to get separated from him for a few days, but there's no reason Salem couldn't get to visit his siblings anyways. Why would they still be living with his parents anyways? How would he know that they still live with his parents? Sabrina would have frozen time or teleported his father away, and then he'd get to spend time with all of his good family members, instead of another boring ending where he spends time with her family at Christmas, when the whole story built up to us finally getting to know Salem's family, in a story with the normally good writer. This ridiculous story was too confusing. Salem should have explained that the books were portals to other universes because a witch made them. Him being from a universe where he has cat parents with clothes and a house to themselves would have been an intriguing twist, explaining why he seemed to act like a person instead of seeming like ridiculous nonsense out of nowhere. He lost his mittens and got kicked out of his house and eventually flew out of a book, somehow. I guess, the art barely shows what he flew out of. And that's how I met Sabrina? We should have seen him go into a portal from a wizard like Merlin that'd be generated from an artifact, letting you choose which universe you want to go to. Then it immediately makes sense that he was able to wander from story to story. He said wander, not warp. Was there a convenient portal to the cosmic interstate for him that wasn't guarded by border patrols? The story has him requiring mittens to get another visit with his family. But if it actually remembered that he has magic powers, he just zaps some mittens up. And there's no excuse for Sabrina or Aunt not effortlessly creating some mittens for him, instead of them going all the way to Merlin, not to find out his exact house, but to get mittens created, which he somehow screws up so that we can't even meet his siblings. Why aren't people from his universe constantly going through it to Earth? I assume that the portal machine has a password and only its creator and Salem know it, and Salem overheard it. Too much needs to be assumed for the story to make sense, and that makes it frustrating and confusing. We always assumed he had a normal cat backstory. Why wasn't that good enough?